Have you ever tasted the dust that precedes the end of a world? Have you ever seen the sky become a dome of cold steel while your stomach aches with a hunger that is not only for flesh, but for relevance? I am the one whom the chronicles call God's punishment. But before I was steel, I was the trampled clay of the Mongolian steppes. My birth name was Temujin, a boy born with a blood clot clenched in his fist, a sign, the shaman said, that my hands would rule with an iron grip. But look at me now. Can you see the slave who wore a wooden yoke around his neck, fleeing through the shadows from rival clans that wanted to erase my lineage from the face of the earth? I was born into a world of absolute chaos, where loyalty was as fickle as the wind of the steppes. My childhood was not one of palaces, but of pure survival in harsh deserts, where my mother, Holun, fought to keep us alive after the premature death of my father. Fate seemed to have decreed that I would be just another forgotten corpse in the dry grass, but the mind of a man forged in pain does not accept the decree of powerful neighbors like the Jin dynasty, who manipulated us as pieces in their game of divide and rule. I learned early that no one survives alone in that indomitable landscape. I learned that forging alliances, the Anda, the brotherhood of blood, was the only way not to be devoured by wolves. My rise was an insult to the blue-blooded aristocrats who sat on inherited thrones. I broke the traditional clan system. Do you know why I won? Because I did not look at a man's father's name. I looked at the precision with which he fired his arrow, and at the unshakable loyalty he devoted to my banner. I promoted soldiers by merit, not lineage, a heresy that transformed shepherds into generals and slaves into commanders of 10,000. I saw fear in the eyes of tribal leaders when I realized that to create a true Mongol identity, I needed to disperse the old clans and mix them into decimal units where the only permitted loyalty was to me, their Khan. In 1206, at the Great Kurultai, the Council of Nobility, the world I knew ended and my empire began. They gave me the title of Genghis Khan, the universal ruler of all that exists between the oceans. I was the leader of the people of the Felt Walls, and my ambition would not stop at the borders of the grasslands. I desired the whole world to bow, not out of vanity, but for a divine mission I believed I had received from Tengri, the god of the eternal blue sky, to place the entire world under a single sword. Do you hear me? This is not the story of a bloodthirsty barbarian, but the confession of an architect who decided that the only path to peace was total submission to my command. My empire was not built only with courage, but with a discipline that would make the kings of Europe tremble in their stone castles. My war machine was a living organism, the decimal system. I divided my men into Arbans of 10, Zuns of 100, Myangans of 1,000, and Tumans of 10,000. The rule was simple and cruel. If a soldier fled, all 10 of his Arban would be executed. If the entire Arban fled, the Zun would pay with their lives. This collective responsibility created cohesion that no army of mercenaries or feudal knights could ever match. We were the wind. Each of my horsemen had 3 to 4 mounts, allowing us to cover impossible distances, up to 160 kilometers in a single day, appearing on the horizon like ghosts before the enemy could even sound the alarm. I mastered the art of the feigned retreat. We made the enemy believe we were in disarray, luring them out of their safe positions, only to turn on our fresh horses and rain-piercing arrows upon their disorganized ranks. Samarkand felt the weight of my strategy. When the defenders left the walls, believing our retreat, they marched directly toward their own extinction. I ruled through the Yasa, my secret code of laws, a set of decrees I kept locked away in archives known only to my royal lineage, so that I could modify them as my will demanded. The Yasa was not about property, it was about absolute obedience. I punished adultery and horse theft with death, but offered something the world had never seen, an almost absolute religious tolerance. Under my rule, Buddhists, Muslims, and Christians could pray freely as long as they respected my law and paid their taxes. I exempted doctors, scholars, and religious leaders from tribute, turning the intellectual elite of the conquered into pillars of my own administration. But don't be mistaken, the weight of the crown is made of blood and silence. I used strategic terror as a management tool. Cities that resisted were systematically annihilated to serve as a warning to the next. Merv and Nishapur became pyramids of skulls because they chose rebellion over submission. I used captured civilians as human shields, the Karash, forcing them to march ahead of our lines to absorb the arrows of their own brothers. The result? The Pax Mongolica, a period of stability where it was said that a virgin carrying a nugget of gold on her head could walk safely from one end of the empire to the other. I created the YAM, the first global postal system, with more than 10,000 relay stations, allowing news to cross continents in weeks, connecting the world as never before. But at the center of that map, I was alone, watching the world I unified become a global market of silk, gunpowder, and secrets, while I myself became a distant myth to those I ruled. Everything that rises must eventually meet the gravity of history. My own death in 1227, during the campaign against the Tanguts, was only the first whisper of the end. I ordered that my tomb be hidden, that no one should know where the Khan of all men rested, so that not even time could profane my silence. But the empire I left was too vast to be contained by a single heart. My sons and grandsons, the golden lineage, divided my work into 4 great branches: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. The fall did not come from lack of strength, but from excess of success and the invisible betrayal of nature. The same trade routes I protected with such zeal, the backbone of my Pax Mongolica, became the roads along which the Black Death traveled. Infected fleas hitched rides in the manes of our horses and in the loads of silk, decimating 1/3 of China's population and half of Europe's. Where there had been commerce, now there was death. My descendants, weakened demographically and divided by internal disputes over succession, began to lose control over distant lands. In China, the Yuan dynasty collapsed when the emperors tried to isolate themselves, becoming too Chinese for the Mongols and too foreign for their subjects, resulting in the rise of the Ming. But look at the borders of your modern world, and you will see my shadow. Modern Russia was born from the power center I helped elevate in Moscow. China was reunified under the mold my Yuan dynasty established. I was the catalyst that forced isolated civilizations to merge into a single continental system. Persian astronomical knowledge traveled east, and gunpowder and the compass from China traveled west under my protection, planting the seeds of what you call the Renaissance. I was not only a destroyer, I was the architect of global connectivity. Power is like the wind on the steppe. It blows strong, topples the weak, and after it passes, all that remains is silence and transformed soil. I began as a slave and ended as the greatest force the contiguous landmass has ever known. My legacy is not in stone monuments that erode, but in the very structure of the interconnected world you inhabit today. If there is a lesson that echoes through the centuries beneath the hooves of my horses, it is this: from the kindness of severity is born the stability of rule. For the order that blood builds is the only one that time, with all its cruelty, hesitates to erase. The sun never set on my empire until I decided it was time for the world to learn to walk without me.